Welcome to episode 8 of The Evidence Room. Inside every investigation, the truth is hidden in the evidence. Tonight, we travel to Italy for one of the most disturbing and mysterious serial killer cases in European history. This is also our first deep dive into Italy, following previous investigations in countries like Canada and the United States. So I want you to picture the Tuscan countryside in the 1970s and 80s. You have the rolling hills, the ancient vineyards, all those historic villas.
Right. It's gorgeous.
Exactly. By day, it is the absolute definition of an idyllic, postcard-perfect setting. But under the cover of dark, specifically on pitch black new moon nights, a predator is hunting in this pristine landscape.
And, the contrast between the beauty of Florence and the sheer brutality of these crimes is just jarring. The statistics we're looking at are incredibly grim. Like between 1968 and 1985, 16 people, so 8 couples, were brutally murdered in the isolated country lanes surrounding the city.
Wow, 16 people.
Yeah. And this reign of terror paralyzed the region and gave birth to a moniker that really horrified an entire nation. El Monster of Florence, or the Monster of Florence.
Our mission today is to walk you through the timeline of this unprecedented terror. We need to examine the incredibly specific forensic evidence that tied these seemingly random attacks together and explore a really unsettling question. Why does this dark puzzle remain officially unsolved today?
Which is a wild forensic journey in itself.
Oh, absolutely. But to understand the sheer scale of the judicial chaos that followed, we really have to start at the very beginning. August 21st, 1968, in Signa, which is a small town just west of Florence.
Right, so on that summer night, a 29-year-old masonry worker named Antonio LoBianco and a 32-year-old homemaker named Barbara Lacci were parked in a car on a remote dirt road. Lacci was actually really well known in the local community. She had a reputation that earned her the nickname the Queen Bee. Sometime during the night, someone approached the vehicle and shot them both to death with a .22 caliber handgun. But the most horrifying element of this scene wasn't just the double homicide itself. It was the fact that there was a survivor in the car.
Right. Barbara's 6-year-old son, Natalino, he was asleep in the back seat when the attack happened.
Exactly. The sound of the gunshots woke him up. Imagine the utter confusion and terror for a child.
Oh, can't even imagine.
In the dark, he found his mother dead in the front seat, and he somehow managed to open the car door, get out, and run through the pitch-black, unfamiliar countryside until he reached a nearby farmhouse to beg for help.
It's just an unimaginable trauma, and from an investigative standpoint, the authorities immediately zeroed in on the most statistically likely suspect, which was Barbara's husband, Stefano Mele. He was older, he was known to be a cuckolded husband, and after facing intense police pressure, he confessed to the murders.
Even though his statements were, all over the place.
Yeah, he gave highly inconsistent statements, changing his story multiple times, but he ultimately took the fall and spent years in prison. So on paper, it looked like a tragic, open-and-shut crime of passion, like a jealous husband seeking revenge.
It definitely seemed that way.
But as we'll see, locking the door doesn't matter if you've locked up the wrong monster.
That's spot on. The closure was a complete illusion. Because while Stefano Mele was sitting in a prison cell, supposedly paying for his crimes, the horror returned to the Florentine hills.
Just completely shattered that illusion of safety.
Exactly. 6 years later, in September 1974, a 19-year-old barman named Pasquale Gentilcore and an 18-year-old accountant named Stefano Pettini were parked in a country lane near a discotheque.
And they were brutally murdered.
Yes, and this is the moment where a chilling, highly specific, and entirely different modus operandi began to emerge.
We have to look at the cultural context here to understand why these victims were so vulnerable. In 1970s Italy, young people typically lived with their parents until they were married.
Right, they had no space of their own.
Exactly. If you were a young couple wanting privacy, you didn't have your own apartment. Your only option was the family car. So you had these isolated dirt roads and wooded areas all around Florence that became known as lovers' lanes.
And the killer knew exactly where to hunt. The sequence of violence at these locations followed a strict, terrifying script. The male victim was always shot first, typically straight through the car window.
Which neutralizes the primary physical threat instantly.
Exactly. But then, the violence escalated drastically toward the female victim. She was usually dragged from the car. In the 1974 case, Stefano Pettini didn't just die from gunshot wounds. She suffered 97 stab wounds and was violated with a grapevine stalk.
My God.
And as the murders continued, the signature of the monster became these horrifying surgical excisions of the pubic area and in later cases, the left breast.
Okay, let's unpack this. If this was just about killing, a gun is enough. You shoot from the dark, you walk away.
Right, you flee the scene immediately.
Exactly. The sheer physical effort, the time it takes to drag a victim out of a vehicle, and the risk of staying at a crime scene to perform these surgical mutilations, I mean, that tells us this wasn't just murder. It was about taking a gruesome trophy.
Yeah, it indicates a deeply seated, deeply disturbed ritualistic compulsion. This wasn't robbery. It wasn't a crime of passion in the traditional impulsive sense.
He was organized.
Highly organized. It was a planned, methodical harvest. And that compulsion only accelerated as time went on. Moving into the 1980s, the bloodshed escalated rapidly.
So what did that look like?
Well, from 1981 to 1985, the monster struck repeatedly, always on dark summer weekends, and specifically targeting the nights of a new moon. The killer required absolute, total darkness in the countryside to operate.
Wait, I thought the pattern was strictly male-female couples. Didn't that reliance on total darkness actually lead to a massive deviation in 1983?
Oh, yes. That completely proves how chaotic and opportunistic this violence really was. Two West German tourists, Wilhelm Meyer and Jens Rusch, were killed while parked in their VW bus.
Right, two men.
Yeah, but Rusch, the male passenger, had a very slim build and long blonde hair. The killer was striking in near total blindness, likely just looking for silhouettes through the glass.
Wow, so he literally made a mistake.
Investigators heavily suspect he simply made a mistake. He looked into the VW bus, saw the long hair in the dark, and assumed it was a woman. When he realized his error after the shooting, no mutilations were performed. He simply fled.
That's terrifying. It highlights the predatory nature of the stalking. He wasn't necessarily targeting specific individuals, he was targeting the outline of a couple in a car.
Which makes anyone in a car a potential target.
Right, and the escalation finally peaks in September 1985 with a French couple, Jean-Michel Kravaishvili and Nadine Moreau. They were murdered while camping in a tent, which marked the last official strike of the monster.
Yeah, the end of the physical attacks.
But what constantly baffles me about serial investigations from this era is how long it takes for police to connect the dots. How did the Italian authorities finally realize they were hunting a single serial killer?
Well, it came down entirely to the ballistics. Every single crime scene, spanning nearly 2 decades, yielded the exact same forensic signature.
The same weapon.
The exact same gun. The weapon used to execute the initial phase of the attacks was always a .22 caliber Beretta handgun, and it was always firing a very specific, somewhat rare type of ammunition, which was Winchester bullets marked with an H stamped on the base of the casing.
But the real turning point, the moment that tied the entire nightmare back to its origin didn't happen until 1982, right?
Yeah, that's right. In 1982, an examining magistrate received an anonymous tip that compelled him to do something unprecedented. He went into the archives and blew the dust off the old 1968 case file of Stephen O'Malley.
The husband who confessed.
Exactly. The husband who had already served time for the very first double murder in Cigna. Tucked inside that manila folder, they found misfiled bullets and shell casings from the 1968 crime scene.
Oh, man.
When the forensics team put those old casings under the microscope and compared them to the bullets recovered from the active serial killings of the 1980s, they were a perfect match.
So the exact same gun used in the 1968 crime was the weapon being used to terrorize Florence 14 years later. But wait, it's not just that they matched the caliber or the general make of the gun, right?
No, not at all. What's fascinating here is that the level of detail the ballistics experts uncovered goes way beyond standard rifling marks. They found identical microstriations on the cylinder and the rim of the casings.
Like microscopic scratches.
Yeah, these microscopic scratches were unique to this specific weapon. But the critical breakthrough was discovering when those marks were made. They weren't even made by firing the gun.
Wait, really? How does that work?
They were made during the loading and extraction cycle. When a cartridge is pushed by the breech bolt carriage into the chamber, it rubs violently against the feed ramp.
So it's essentially a mechanical fingerprint. Even if the killer never actually pulled the trigger, the gun has already signed its name on the casing just by chambering the round.
Exactly. That friction leaves a scratch as unique as a human fingerprint. Every time the specific Beretta loaded a Winchester H bullet, it marked it.
Which proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that a single weapon connected the 1968 murder to the entire string of serial killings. Imagine living in Florence the moment the police officially announced this to the public.
It triggered absolute mass hysteria.
Oh, I bet. The media dubbed the killer the maniac of couples. The daily life of an entire region fundamentally changed overnight.
It altered the whole social fabric of Tuscany. We talked about how cars were the only place for youth to find privacy. The police were so desperate to stop the body count that they resorted to driving around with loudspeakers.
Warning people to stay inside.
Yeah, and they actually distributed flyers begging the youth, openly saying, "Don't make love in cars." People were terrified to go out after dark.
And complicating this fear was an incredibly creepy atmospheric detail about these lovers' lanes. They were heavily frequented by voyeurs.
Right, the local peeping toms.
Yeah, men who would sneak through the underbrush at night to watch the couples in the cars. Suddenly, this underground network of voyeurs found themselves accidentally witnessing brutal murders or becoming prime suspects themselves.
Which created a massive headache for the investigators. You had men sneaking around the woods at night, terrified to come forward with what they saw because they'd be admitting to being voyeurs.
Obviously, they didn't want to out themselves.
Exactly. And then you had people like the local paramedic, Enzo Spalletti. He was a known voyeur who actually bragged about the details of one of the murders before the bodies had even been officially discovered by the police.
He just couldn't help himself. He wanted to sound important, to show he knew a secret, and it got him thrown in a jail cell as the prime suspect.
Spalletti spent months in jail, and the public thought the nightmare was over, until the monster struck again, killing another couple while Spalletti was locked safely behind bars.
Which completely cleared his name. I mean, the ultimate alibi is being in a jail cell when the killer strikes again, which is exactly what kept happening to these suspects.
It became a deeply frustrating recurring theme. Because the police had forensically linked the 1980s murders back to the 1968 murder of Barbara Lacci, they logically assumed the killer must be connected to her.
Right, the Sardinian Trail. She and her husband were originally from Sardinia, living in Tuscany, so the police started rounding up everyone from that 1968 social circle.
They arrested Barbara Lacci's former lovers, they arrested her relatives, they chased this Sardinian Trail relentlessly, convinced that the gun was being passed around a close-knit group of men holding a grudge.
But just like with Spalletti, the killer kept striking while these men were in custody. And you know, when logic and traditional police work fail time and time again, people start looking for shadows.
They definitely do.
The public desperation naturally led to wilder, more esoteric theories. If it wasn't a lone madman, what if it was a wealthy, organized group?
Right, the rumors about satanic cults operating in the ancient Tuscan hills.
Exactly. People thought they were commissioning the murders to harvest specific body parts for dark rituals.
And those rumors gained serious traction because of bizarre tangential events. Like, there's a prominent doctor from Perugia, Francesco Narducci.
Oh, right. What happened with him?
In 1985, just a month after the final murders, his body was recovered from a lake under highly suspicious circumstances. The official ruling was drowning, but many speculated he was the mastermind of this esoteric sect.
Either silencing himself or being silenced by others once the police got too close. There was even a journalistic theory connecting the crimes to an American expat, Joe Bevilacqua, who worked at the Florence American Cemetery.
Yeah, that theory speculated he was actually both the Zodiac Killer from California and the Monster of Florence.
Which is wild. Now, this was later dismissed by courts as a bizarre theory, but it perfectly illustrates the utter desperation of the era.
People were willing to believe a transatlantic supervillain was responsible because the reality of an invisible local predator was just too terrifying.
Well, it wasn't until the 1990s that the investigation finally zeroed in on a suspect who would become the permanent face of this case, Pietro Pacciani. He was a local hot-tempered farmer with a notoriously violent past.
Yeah, he had a previous murder conviction from back in the 1950s. He'd killed a man he caught with his fiancée.
So the authorities raided Pacciani's home, and they found what they presented as the ultimate smoking gun. An unfired .22 caliber Winchester cartridge with the signature H stamped on the base, buried right in the dirt of his garden.
Which seemed incredibly damning.
Very. Inside his house, they found a sketch pad where he had drawn over newspaper photos of the crimes, heavily shading in the pubic areas. They also found a soap dish that allegedly belonged to one of the 1983 victims.
On the surface, the physical evidence looked impossible to argue with. But the defense, and honestly a lot of journalists, immediately raised red flags.
Because of the bullet.
Yeah, the unfired bullet found in the garden was heavily suspected by some to have been planted after the fact to frame him. The soil around it looked freshly disturbed, and the bullet was remarkably clean for having supposedly been buried for years.
Okay, let's play devil's advocate here. Was he a mastermind or a convenient patsy? Because there's a financial detail that just doesn't sit right with the profile of a lone rural killer.
Money he had hidden away.
Exactly. Pacciani was a modest, arguably destitute farmer, yet investigators found he had somehow amassed 157 million lire in cash and bonds. In today's money, that's well over 100,000 euros.
Where does a subsistence farmer get that kind of money? It immediately breathed new life into the esoteric theories.
Was Pacciani just a violent hitman for wealthy instigators who wanted the body parts? I mean, Pacciani was convicted in 1994, but the evidence was so highly contested that he was completely acquitted on appeal in 1996.
And the justice system was preparing for a final retrial to settle his guilt once and for all, but he died of a heart attack in 1998, taking his secrets to the grave.
But the authorities didn't really believe Pacciani acted alone anyway, did they?
No, they didn't. The idea that this aging, heavy-set farmer could silently stalk couples, shoot with precision, and perform rapid surgical mutilations in total darkness, well, it strained credulity.
And this is where the story takes a turn into the darkly absurd. Enter his supposed accomplices, Mario Vanni and Giancarlo Lotti.
Right, Lotti became the star witness. He confessed to participating in the murders and directly implicated both Pacciani and Vanni. He claimed they were a tight-knit group working together to carry out the attacks.
And during the trial, Vanni tried to downplay their relationship to distance himself from the conspiracy. He famously claimed they weren't a murder squad, they were just innocent friends who hung out in the countryside.
Yeah, calling themselves Compagni di Merende, or snack buddies.
It is incredibly chilling how a phrase meant to evoke innocent childhood picnics, like sharing bread and cheese in the hills, became entirely corrupted. In Italy today, Compagni di Merende is synonymous with a brutal serial killer ring.
It really is. And based largely on Lotti's confession, both Vanni and Lotti were ultimately convicted of several of the murders. The justice system officially had its culprits.
But those convictions leave many legal experts, independent researchers, and most importantly, the victims' families, deeply unsatisfied to this day. If you have a signed confession from one of the killers, why isn't the case considered definitively closed?
Because Lotti's confession was a structural mess. He constantly changed his motive to fit whatever the interrogators wanted to hear. First, he told investigators they killed out of sheer anger over their own sexual rejections.
Okay, and then what?
Then, months later, he changed his story entirely, aligning with the cult rumors by claiming that a mysterious, unnamed doctor paid them vast sums of money for the mutilated body parts. He just couldn't keep his own narrative straight.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Beyond the shifting motives, the physical evidence at the actual crime scenes completely contradicts their involvement.
The lack of physical evidence, really.
Right. Despite the convictions of the snack buddies, the actual murder weapon, that infamous .22 Beretta, was never found. And at the numerous, incredibly bloody crime scenes in the woods, not a single strand of DNA, not a footprint, and not a single fingerprint belonging to Pacciani, Vanni, or Lotti was ever recovered.
It's unbelievable. And we cannot forget the most gruesome, boldest, unresolved detail of the entire investigation.
The letter.
Yes, the 1985 letter. Just days after the final murder of the French couple, a taunting letter was mailed directly to the state prosecutor, Silvia Della Monica.
And what was inside?
Inside the envelope was a folded piece of paper containing a tissue sample. It was a piece of the French victim's breast. It was a direct, horrifying challenge to the authorities, proving the killer, or killers, were watching the investigation closely and felt utterly untouchable.
Which brings us to the modern day. Why isn't this case closed? The Monster of Florence remains a paradox. On one hand, the forensic ballistics link the crimes beautifully.
Oh, absolutely. Science proved, through those microscopic extraction marks, that a single weapon connected almost 2 decades of bloodshed. The how was absolutely solved.
But the human element of the investigation was deeply, catastrophically flawed. Decades of misfiled evidence, tunnel vision on convenient suspects, overwhelming societal panic, and highly contradictory confessions left the true identity of the mastermind shrouded in doubt.
That's why families of the victims are still fighting for the truth today. Lawyers, like Walter Biscotti, are actively demanding the case be reopened.
Because there are still unexamined clues, right?
Yes. They point out that there is still unexamined DNA on those anonymous letters, including the one sent to the prosecutor. DNA that never matched Pacciani or his snack buddies.
Wow.
They want authorities to re-examine other suspects from the old files, like a man named Giampiero Vigilante. He was a known associate of Pacciani's who hoarded news clippings of the murders.
Wait, and didn't he have the ammunition too?
He possessed the exact same rare type of Winchester HP bullets, and yet somehow slipped through the cracks of the original investigation.
That is just wild. The tools exist today to test that old evidence. But opening those files means confronting the reality that the Italian justice system may have convicted the wrong men.
allowing the real monster to quietly fade into history.
We like to think that science and ballistics offer absolute certainty. But the Monster of Florence proves that even when the evidence draws a perfect circle around the how, human error, prejudice, and panic can forever obscure the who. It makes you wonder, how many other solved cases are just waiting for a microscope to prove them wrong?
Thanks for listening to The Evidence Room. If you enjoyed this episode, like and subscribe for more true crime investigations from around the world. Remember, some cases remain unsolved, but the evidence always tells a story.